The space station cafeteria was quiet. Only a few humans sat with their meals. Among them was Daniel, a maintenance worker who often stayed late. He liked the silence after the rush, liked to enjoy his food slowly. But that night, something unusual was about to happen. The doors slid open with a soft hiss and an alien girl stepped inside. Her skin glowed faintly under the lights, pale blue with delicate patterns like starlight. Her silver eyes darted around nervously. As if searching for safety, she looked fragile, almost too young to be wandering alone. Her thin hands clutched at her robe, and her bare feet made no sound on the metal floor. Daniel noticed her right away but said nothing. He had seen alien refugees before, but this one seemed different. She looked more frightened than lost, like a small animal entering a hunter's den. He kept his head low, hoping not to startle her. The alien girl's gaze fell on him. Her eyes widened when she saw the object in his hand. It was only a fork, steel shining under the cafeteria light. But to her it looked sharp, dangerous, like a weapon made for killing. Her breath caught and she froze, her body trembling. Daniel raised another bite of food to his mouth. Completely unaware, the alien girl's fear grew. She whispered words in her language. Quick and panicked, she took a step back, ready to run. But her hunger held her in place, her heart pounded, her body shaking as she stared at the fork. She believed the human was armed and dangerous. Daniel finally looked up. His mouth still full, he frowned slightly. Confused by the terror on her face, he didn't understand. Why was she staring at him like that? Slowly, he put his fork down, but the sound of it hitting the tray made her flinch. Her silver eyes glimmered with fear, and her hands raised as if to shield herself. The air grew heavy, the silence sharp. Other humans in the room looked away, uninterested. They were used to frightened aliens passing through. But Daniel felt something stir in his chest. He could see the misunderstanding written on her face. She thought the fork was a blade, and he was her enemy. The alien girl's lips trembled, and she whispered again in her tongue. Her voice cracked, full of fear. Her body swaying slightly as if ready to collapse, Daniel kept very still, his instincts warning him not to move too fast. He raised his empty hand slowly, showing he held no threat. His voice was calm, low, gentle. "It's okay," he said, even though she might not understand, but his kindness did not reach her yet. Her people had been taught for years that humans carried hidden weapons. Every object in their hands could mean pain, punishment, or worse, the fork. So simple to him was a nightmare to her. Her mind screamed danger. Her heart begged her to run. Daniel leaned back, letting her see the fork lying harmless on the tray. His eyes stayed soft, steady, trying to bridge the distance between them. The girl's breathing was ragged, her chest rising and falling too fast. She pressed her back to the wall, her nails scratching against the cold metal. Her legs trembled, ready to spring at any wrong move. For a long moment neither spoke. Only the quiet hum of the cafeteria lights filled the room. Daniel knew one mistake could send her fleeing into the dangerous station halls, or worse, into the arms of those who would exploit her fear. He had to be careful, patient human. He reached out slowly, pushing the fork farther away across the table. The girl's eyes followed it like prey watches a predator. Her silver gaze shimmered with tears, her lips parting in a shaky breath. She could not understand why the human wasn't attacking, why he wasn't using the weapon she feared so much. Her fear and confusion filled the room like a storm. Daniel's heart pounded as he realized the truth. This girl had lived her whole life believing something false, and in this moment, he held her trust in his hands. One wrong step, and it would be broken forever. The cafeteria seemed smaller, the lights dimmer. The distance between a human and an alien girl felt like the distance between worlds. The fork still gleamed on the table. Quiet, harmless, but to her, a symbol of death. And to Daniel, a symbol of a choice. Would he let her walk away with fear, or show her the truth? The mistake had already been made, but the story was only beginning. The alien girl stood frozen against the wall, her breath quick and shallow. Her silver eyes stayed locked on Daniel, her whole body trembling. Every muscle was tight, ready to fight or flee. And yet she could not take her eyes off the fork lying on the table. Daniel leaned back in his chair, keeping his movement slow. He could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. One wrong gesture could turn fear into panic. He raised his hands again, palms open showing peace, his voice low, steady. "I won't hurt you," he whispered. But his words were only sound to her, strange and unfamiliar. The girl hissed something in her language, her voice sharp with warning, though Daniel couldn't understand. He knew the meaning well. Stay back, stay away. Her eyes darted between him and the fork as though the object might spring alive. Her thin shoulders shook, fear pressing down on her like a weight. She looked young, but the fire of survival burned inside her gaze. Daniel slowly slid the fork farther from himself, letting the metal scrape softly across the tray. The girl flinched at the noise, her nails clawing against the wall. Her breath came quicker, her chest rising as if she might scream. But still she didn't run. Hunger chained her to that spot. Daniel noticed the way her eyes lingered not just on him, but on the food, pieces of bread, bits of meat, steam rising with a smell that reached her even through fear. Her stomach betrayed her, rumbling loud enough for him to hear. Daniel's heart sank. She wasn't just afraid. She was starving. The sight of food tempted her, but the fork stood in the way. It was both a barrier and a demon in her mind. He realized the battle here was not between him and her, but between her fear and her hunger. The girl finally spoke again, this time softer, her voice trembling. The words were alien, but her meaning carried through her eyes. She was begging, pleading for him not to strike, her hands lifted not in attack. But in surrender, Daniel shook his head slowly, showing her he had no interest in hurting her. He pointed to the tray, then to her as if offering the food. His hand open, empty, unthreatening. But she didn't move. She remained pressed to the wall. Every step forward in her mind meant risking her life. She watched his every twitch, every breath, her own heart pounding in reply. It was a standoff, fear on one side, patience on the other. The whole cafeteria seemed to fade away until only they remained, human and alien. Divided by a fork. Daniel thought carefully. How could he show her the truth? He reached slowly for the tray again, careful not to touch the fork. Lifting a piece of bread with his bare hand, he held it up. The girl stiffened, ready to react, but then she saw no weapon, no attack, just simple food in an open hand. Her nostrils flared as the smell reached her. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. Her hunger screamed louder than her fear, but still she didn't move. Her instincts told her humans tricked with kindness. That food could be bait, that peace could be a lie. She whispered again in her tongue. Low, almost broken, Daniel could not know the words, but he saw her tears. The fear had become heavier than her small frame could bear. He set the bread on the table gently, pushing it closer to the edge. Then he sat back, raising his hands again, his eyes steady, calm, almost pleading. It was her choice now, step forward or stay trapped by fear. The girl's lips quivered as she stared at the bread. Her legs twitched, shifting as though her body betrayed her own decision. Minutes stretched like hours. The hum of the lights above echoed in the silence. Other humans glanced their way but turned back to their meals. No one cared enough to interfere, but Daniel stayed locked in this moment, refusing to look away. Because he knew this was more than hunger. This was the first fragile step toward trust. The girl finally moved, one slow step forward. Her bare foot touched the metal floor with the softness of a shadow. Her eyes never left Daniel, her body shaking with each breath. She reached the table edge, her hand trembling above the bread. Her nails scraped against the tray as she snatched it quickly, as if expecting him to strike the moment she touched it. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched as she clutched the bread to her chest like a treasure. Her eyes darted back to the fork. Still lying harmlessly, her fear remained. But something had cracked. Hunger had won a small victory over terror. The standoff wasn't finished, but it was shifting. A seed of curiosity had been planted deep inside her fear. Daniel leaned back again, his voice low and soft. "You're safe here," he whispered, though she could not understand. The girl took a shaky bite, chewing quickly, her tears spilling. The bread softened her face, even if only for a moment. But her eyes stayed fixed on him, studying every move. The standoff had not ended. No, it had only just begun. The girl chewed the bread quickly, her hands shaking. Each bite was small, rushed, like she feared it could be stolen at any moment. Her silver eyes darted between Daniel and the fork lying on the tray. Even as hunger filled her stomach, fear still ruled her heart. Daniel stayed quiet, watching her carefully. He could see the battle inside her, the pull of hunger against the chains of fear. He knew he needed to break the illusion that kept her trembling, but he also knew one wrong move could destroy everything. So he thought of the simplest way to show her the truth. He reached slowly, his hand moving not toward her, But toward the tray, the girl stiffened instantly, her body pressing against the table's edge. Her fingers clutched the bread tighter, her shoulders rising in defense, her voice broke in a warning cry. Soft but desperate, Daniel froze, lifting his hands again to show no harm. Then very carefully he pointed at the fork. His expression gentle, calm, like a teacher with a frightened child. He picked it up slowly, holding it in a way that showed no threat, not pointing it at her, but turning it so the light glinted harmlessly. Her breath caught, her eyes narrowing as she watched his every move. Daniel pierced a small piece of food with the fork. The alien girl's body flinched as though expecting him to strike. But instead he lifted the piece of meat to his own mouth. He chewed slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He swallowed and set the fork back on the tray, letting it rest quietly. Her lips parted, confusion spreading across her face. The weapon had not cut him, had not harmed her. Instead, it had helped him eat. She tilted her head slightly, her trembling easing for a moment. It was the first crack in the wall of fear. Daniel repeated the action, slower this time. He picked up another piece of food, showing her clearly how it worked. His hand moved with patience, his face calm, almost smiling. He wanted her to see, not danger, but purpose. The fork was no blade, only a tool. The girl's silver eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her features. Her thin lips trembled as she whispered something under her breath. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it was not only fear now. It was the weight of realization. The world was not what she had been told. Her people's warnings were wrong, or at least incomplete. Her gaze flicked between the fork and the bread in her hand. She seemed torn between curiosity and terror. Her fingers twitched as though she wanted to try, but instinct held her back, screaming that it was a trap. Her chest rose and fell quickly. Her breath sharp and uneven. Daniel noticed her hesitation, and so he tried something new. He took another piece of bread and held the fork out gently, not toward her but toward the food. He pierced it carefully and lifted it, offering it forward, not close enough to touch her, but enough for her to see. Her eyes locked on the motion, her hands shaking harder. Every instinct told her not to trust, but the scent of warm food reached her nose, making her swallow. Her hunger screamed louder with each second. Daniel's hand stayed steady. Patient waiting, the girl whispered again, her voice soft like broken glass, her words unrecognizable, but her tone carried fear and question. Daniel answered with only his eyes, calm and kind. He leaned closer just enough to place the food back on the tray. Then he pushed it gently toward her side, letting go. The fork rested on the edge, holding the bread. It was hers now if she dared to take it. Her fingers hovered, trembling in the air above the tray. She pulled back once, twice. Fear overwhelming courage, but the smell of bread, the sight of his calm eyes, they gave her a sliver of bravery. Finally, with a quick, almost violent motion, she snatched it. The fork clattered against the tray as she pulled the bread free. Her breaths came fast as though she had stolen something forbidden, but when she chewed the bite, nothing bad happened. No trap, no pain, only food, only warmth. Her body sagged with a shaky breath. For the first time, her eyes softened. She looked at Daniel not as a threat, but with uncertainty. Her lips parted, whispering words in her language again. This time they sounded less like warning, more like wonder. Daniel felt relief wash through him. The tension in his chest loosened as he realized she had begun to see. The fork was no weapon. It was truth. Gentle and simple. He gave her a small smile. Nodding softly, she blinked, staring at him, her own expression shifting. Her hands, though still trembling, reached toward the tray again. This time not for bread, but for the fork itself. Her fingers touched the metal, recoiling at first as though it might burn. Then she gripped it tighter, holding it awkwardly. Her eyes flicked up to Daniel, seeking guidance. He reached out slowly, wrapping his hand around his own fork. With gentle patience, he showed her again, piercing food, lifting it, eating without harm. The alien girl watched closely, her lips pressed tight. She copied his motion clumsily, but the bread stayed on. She lifted it, shaking, and placed it to her mouth. When she bit down, her eyes widened again. The taste of food, carried by the tool she once feared, filled her mouth. Her tears returned, but now they were mixed with something else, relief, shame, gratitude, all tangled in her fragile heart. She whispered again, softer this time, almost like thanks. Daniel's chest warmed as he watched her. The simple truth had reached her at last. The fork no longer looked like a blade in her hand. It looked like a bridge, and in that small, quiet cafeteria, the first bond between human and alien began to grow. The alien girl sat stiffly at the table, her silver eyes lowered to the fork in her hand. It felt heavy, though it was light. Strange, though it was simple. She held it as if it might turn into a blade at any moment. Her breathing was quick, uneven, but her lips trembled with something new. Curiosity. Daniel watched her quietly, his arms resting loosely on the table. He didn't speak, he didn't rush, he only waited. He knew this moment was fragile, too fragile for words. The fork in her hand was more than metal. It was a choice to believe in her fear, or to believe in what she had just seen. Her thin fingers tightened around the handle. Her body shook as though she carried a great weight. Slowly, very slowly, she lifted the fork again. Her eyes flicked to Daniel, checking his every movement. He stayed still, calm, steady, his expression soft with patience. The girl pierced a small piece of bread on the tray. The motion was clumsy, the bread nearly slipped off. Her lips parted in shock that she had done it at all. She stared at the fork as if it were alive. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. Daniel gave a gentle nod, encouraging her silently. His own fork moved to copy hers, showing her again how simple it was. He pierced another piece of food, raised it, and ate it slowly. The alien girl flinched, but her eyes stayed locked on his mouth. She saw him chew, saw him swallow, saw no harm done. Her trembling grew worse, but her hunger pressed harder. Her stomach growled loudly, her face flushing with shame. Daniel pretended not to notice, giving her dignity. She lifted the fork closer to her lips, her hand shaking. The bread hovered in front of her mouth, waiting, daring. Her silver eyes closed tightly. She drew in a breath like someone preparing to leap into danger, and then she bit. The bread touched her tongue. Soft, warm, simple. The taste spread through her mouth. No pain, no poison, no trap, only food. Her breath broke in a gasp as her eyes flew open. For a second she froze, waiting for something bad to happen, but nothing did. Her lips pressed tighter around the fork as she chewed carefully. Her throat worked as she swallowed. The food slid down, filling her with warmth she had nearly forgotten. A tear rolled down her cheek. Falling onto the table, her shoulders sagged, the tension in her chest loosening for the first time. Her hands shook not only with fear now, but with release. She had done it. She had taken the first bite, and the world had not ended. Daniel exhaled softly, relief washing through him. He smiled faintly, his eyes kind, but he still did not speak. He didn't want to scare her with the weight of words. He wanted her to feel this small victory without pressure, so he stayed quiet, letting her taste, letting her believe. The girl stared at the fork in awe. It no longer looked like a weapon, not fully. It looked like something else. Something useful, she whispered in her own tongue, her voice soft, trembling. It was not a warning this time, but a sound close to wonder. She pierced another piece of bread, her movement still clumsy but a little steadier now. Her lips curved in the faintest shape of disbelief. She lifted it again, biting with more confidence than before. Her hunger began to win, feeding courage into her fragile heart. Other humans glanced at her from across the room. Some smirked, some looked away, none cared. But Daniel watched with quiet pride. He knew this was more than food, more than survival. It was the first bridge between fear and trust. The alien girl ate another bite, then another. Her hands still trembled. But her tears had changed. They were not only fear now, but relief. The taste of food had broken through years of lies. Her body slowly relaxed, her shoulders lowering as she chewed. When she looked up again, her silver eyes met Daniel's. There was still caution, still distance, but also a spark of something new. She held the fork in her hand and whispered again, her tone lighter, uncertain, but no longer sharp with warning. Daniel didn't understand her words, but he felt the meaning. It was thanks, it was fragile gratitude trying to take form. He gave her a small nod in return. Not too big, not too sudden, just enough. His patience told her what words could not. She was safe here, safe enough to eat, safe enough to breathe, safe enough to trust. The alien girl's lips quivered. Her first bite had changed everything. It was not just food, it was proof. Proof that not all humans carried hidden blades. Proof that truth could be gentle. And proof that kindness could be stronger than fear. In that small cafeteria, under the dim lights of the station, the world for her had shifted. Her heart was still guarded, her mind still doubtful. But with one bite, the door had opened a little wider. The fork she once feared had become the tool that fed her hope. And though she didn't know it yet, that single bite was the beginning of a bond that would change both their lives. Forever. The alien girl sat quietly, the fork trembling in her hand. Her silver eyes glistened with tears. Her lips pressed together. She had eaten. She had survived the first bite. But her heart was still caught between fear and trust. Daniel stayed across the table, still as a stone. He didn't push her, didn't demand, didn't rush. Instead, he let silence be their bridge. The hum of the lights above, the faint clatter of dishes far away. Those sounds filled the space where words could not. The girl looked at him again, uncertain. Her shoulders trembled. But her gaze lingered longer this time. She studied his face as if searching for hidden cruelty. But all she found was patience, calm eyes and steady hands. He was no predator, no enemy, at least not tonight. She whispered in her language, a soft broken sound. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but the tone felt different. No longer warning, but questioning. He leaned forward slightly, tilting his head in response. It was a simple gesture, but it told her he was listening. Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile, then faded. She pierced another piece of bread with the fork. This time she looked at him before she ate it, as if asking permission, as if waiting for his approval. Daniel gave a small nod, and she lifted it to her lips. The bite filled her chest with warmth. Her hand steadied just a little. She chewed slower, savoring instead of rushing. Her tears no longer fell in fear, but in quiet release. Something inside her had shifted. Fragile but real, Daniel decided to show her more. He reached for his own fork, lifted food, and pointed gently at her. Then at himself, then back at her fork. A simple lesson. This was not a weapon, but a tool. Her eyes widened, understanding creeping into her mind. She copied him, slowly, carefully, piercing food, lifting it, holding it too high, too stiff. Her motions were awkward, clumsy but determined. Daniel smiled softly, nodding again, encouraging her. And she tried once more, this time steadier. When she managed to eat without dropping the piece, her lips parted in surprise. A small sound escaped her. Half a laugh, half a sob. Her free hand covered her mouth, ashamed of her own emotion. But Daniel only looked at her gently, never mocking, never harsh. For the first time she lowered her guard. Her shoulders eased, her trembling lessened. She set the fork down carefully, staring at it with new eyes. It no longer looked like death, it looked like hope. Her silver gaze lifted, meeting Daniel's steady brown eyes. Something passed between them, silent but powerful. She did not speak his language. He did not speak hers, but they had shared food, shared fear, shared truth, and that was enough to build the first stone of a bond. The girl reached forward slowly, her hand trembling. Not for the food, not for the fork, but toward Daniel. Her fingers hovered near his side of the table. Her eyes wide, uncertain, afraid to finish the motion. Daniel moved his hand slowly. Resting it on the table, open, she froze, staring at it as though it were fire. Then, with a shaky breath, she placed her hand over his. Her touch was light, almost weightless, her fingers cold, trembling against his skin. But she did not pull away. Daniel kept still, his hand warm beneath hers. He didn't grip, didn't force, only let her rest there. The girl's chest rose and fell quickly. Her lips parted as though she might cry again. But her eyes softened, glowing faintly under the light. For years she had been taught to fear humans. Every story painted them as monsters, every tool in their hands a blade, but now she sat with one, her hand resting on his, and for the first time, she wondered if the stories were lies. Daniel gave a faint smile, nodding slowly, his voice low, soft, steady. "It's okay," he whispered. She tilted her head, not knowing the words, but she felt the tone, felt the warmth behind them. Her hand tightened slightly, her trust deepening. They stayed like that for long moments. Two beings from different worlds holding on in silence. The fork lay forgotten between them. No longer an enemy. The bread was gone, but the bond was just beginning. Her silver eyes held his brown ones, unblinking, steady. She whispered again in her language, her tone soft, almost gentle now. Daniel didn't understand, but he didn't need to. Her voice was no longer filled with fear. It carried hope, fragile but shining. The alien girl pulled her hand back slowly. Her cheeks flushed faintly, her lips trembling. But when she picked up the fork again, she did not tremble as much, her motions steadied. Her grip firm, her heart lighter. She had begun to trust, not fully, not yet, but enough. Daniel leaned back, relief flooding through him. He knew this was only the first step, but it was the most important. From fear to food, from food to touch. From touch to trust, the bond was forming. Quiet, unseen, but unbreakable. In the silence of the cafeteria, under dim station lights, a human and an alien girl began to change one another. Not through war, not through power, but through patience, kindness, and a simple tool once mistaken for danger. The fork had started it, but the bond was what would last. The cafeteria grew quieter as time passed. The other humans had already finished their meals and left. Only Daniel and the alien girl remained. The hum of the lights above filled the silence like a soft song. She sat across from him, still holding the fork carefully. Her silver eyes no longer burned with fear, but with something new. Something softer, something uncertain. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but she struggled, words dying before they left her tongue. Daniel leaned forward a little. His arms resting on the table, he gave her space, but his eyes stayed kind and steady. "Go on," he whispered gently. Though he knew she wouldn't understand, it was the tone that mattered, not the words. The alien girl swallowed hard, gathering her courage. Finally, she spoke in her broken voice. The words were strange, sharp sounds that Daniel couldn't follow, but her trembling expression told him enough. She was trying to explain, to confess the reason for her fear. Her hands moved as she spoke, drawing invisible shapes in the air. Daniel listened closely, watching her hands. Her fingers pointed at the fork, then at him, then at herself. Her voice shook as though she carried a heavy burden. At last, she mimed striking motions with the fork, her eyes narrowing in fear, her body recoiling as she remembered. Daniel's chest tightened. He understood. Her people had been taught that humans used tools to hurt, that even the smallest object in their hands could be a weapon. Generations of lies spread to keep fear alive, and now she sat before him, living proof of that fear. The alien girl lowered her eyes, ashamed. Her voice cracked as she spoke again. Her words were like a confession, soft and broken. She tapped her chest with her fingers, then drew a line across her arm as if to show scars unseen. Daniel's breath caught, his eyes softening. He realized she was not just afraid of humans. She had lived through cruelty, maybe even seen her people cut down. The fear wasn't just taught, it was lived. Her tears weren't only fear, they were memories. He leaned back slowly, giving her room. His chest ached with compassion. He wanted to tell her she was safe, that he was different. But all he could offer was his calm presence. And so he stayed silent, letting her speak in her own way. Her voice rose and fell like waves. She pointed again at the fork, then at her mouth, then at his. Her eyes filled with disbelief, her lips trembling. She whispered something that sounded like a question. Her gaze locked on him, searching desperately for an answer. Daniel gave her a small nod, a gentle smile. He lifted his fork again, pierced a piece of bread, and ate slowly. His eyes never left hers, showing her the truth once more. The fork was not for harm, but for life. Her lips parted, her breath shaking as the realization grew stronger. She picked up her own fork, copying his action, her hand steadier now, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the light. When she ate this time, she did not cry in fear. She chewed slowly, her gaze softening, her body relaxing, her shoulders dropped, as though a heavy weight had slipped away. Daniel exhaled quietly, relief filling his chest. He had seen it happen. Her wall of fear had cracked. For the first time, she truly believed him. Not through his words, but through his patience and truth. A simple action had carried more power than any speech. The girl lowered her fork and stared at him. Her silver eyes shimmered with tears, but they were different now. Not the sharp tears of terror, but the soft tears of release. She whispered again, softer, almost like a song. Her hand pressed lightly over her heart. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He didn't know her language, but he knew her meaning. It was gratitude, pure and fragile. He gave her a small nod, his eyes warm. "You're welcome," he whispered, even though she wouldn't understand. For the first time since she entered the cafeteria, the girl smiled, small and uncertain, but real. Her lips curved gently, her trembling eased. It was the first true expression of trust, and it lit something inside Daniel's chest like fire. She leaned back slowly, her hands resting in her lap. The fork sat quietly on the tray. No longer feared, her eyes studied him again. But this time they held no suspicion. Instead, they held wonder, a quiet question. Could a human really be trusted? Could kindness be true? Daniel knew her journey wasn't finished. Fear like hers didn't vanish in a single night. But he had given her something no one else had. Patience, kindness, and a gentle truth. And that truth was enough to change everything. The alien girl lowered her gaze, whispering something soft. Her words carried the sound of relief, of surrender. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth lifting. He knew this was only the beginning, but it was a beginning strong enough to carry them forward. In the silence of the empty cafeteria, two strangers from different worlds shared a revelation, not through speeches, not through power, but through food, patience, and a fork once mistaken for danger, and in that moment, trust began to grow like a seed in the dark. The alien girl sat in silence, her fork resting gently on the tray. Her silver eyes shimmered with faint light, no longer wild with fear. Instead, they were softer now, curious, almost peaceful. Her thin shoulders that had been tight with tension slowly loosened. Daniel watched her quietly, his heart steady. He had not spoken much, but he had spoken with his actions, and actions were what reached her. Simple, patient, kind. He leaned back in his chair, letting her see he had no more to prove. The girl picked up another piece of bread, this time without trembling. Her fingers still small and fragile around the fork, but her motion was steady, calm. She pierced the food, lifted it, and placed it in her mouth. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, shy but real. Daniel felt relief spread through him like warmth. This was not just about food, he knew. This was about trust. And now she had taken it into her own hands. She was no longer waiting for him to show her. It was hers now. The alien girl whispered in her language. Soft and melodic, her voice carried no fear. No warning, only a gentle tone. She pressed her hand lightly to her chest as she spoke, her silver eyes glimmering as she looked at him. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he felt their weight. It was thanks, it was trust, it was the beginning of friendship. He nodded slowly, his lips curving into a faint smile. You're welcome, he murmured softly, even if she couldn't know the meaning. His voice carried the warmth his words could not, and she seemed to sense it, her shoulders relaxing even more. For a long while, they sat together, eating quietly. No walls between them, no weapons in sight. Only food, only silence, only the strange bond forming across the table. It felt fragile, but it was real. And Daniel knew fragile things often grew stronger with care. At last the girl lowered the fork and leaned back. Her lips parted, her breath softer now, her face looked younger, freer. As if the fear had aged her before, she looked at him again, tilting her head with curiosity, and then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It was small, hesitant, but it was a smile. And it broke something inside Daniel, something heavy. Something unspoken. He smiled back, a little broader this time. The weight of the night lifted, replaced by quiet peace. Two strangers, no longer enemies. Sitting like companions, the alien girl whispered again. She touched the fork lightly, then looked at him with wide eyes. Her words were slow, careful, as though she wanted him to understand. Daniel leaned closer, watching her lips. He couldn't make sense of her language, but her gesture said enough. She no longer saw the fork as danger. She now saw it as truth. As a bridge, she lifted it once more, showing him she understood, then lowered it carefully onto the tray, almost reverently, as if she were laying down a burden she had carried too long. Daniel nodded, his eyes soft with pride. The gentle truth had won. It had broken through her walls. Not by force, not by power, but by patience and kindness. And that victory meant more than any battle could. It was proof that trust could be born even in fear. The cafeteria lights flickered faintly as if signaling the late hour. The girl looked around nervously, but less afraid now. She pulled her robe tighter around her thin frame. Her silver eyes returned to Daniel, uncertain but hopeful, as though she was asking silently, "What now?" Daniel stood slowly, pushing his tray aside. He motioned gently toward the door, then to her. A simple invitation, not a command, not a demand. She hesitated, her bare feet shifting nervously on the floor, but her eyes softened and she gave the smallest nod. Together they walked toward the door. The fork left behind on the tray no longer feared. It rested quietly as the symbol of their night. The tool that had turned danger into peace, the object that had changed an entire story. The hallway outside was dim, filled with the hum of machines. The girl walked carefully beside him, her steps light, cautious. Her eyes still darted around, but she no longer trembled. Her gaze often returned to him, steadying her heart. And he slowed his steps to match hers, giving her comfort. For years, she had been told to fear humans for years. She had believed every story, every warning, but tonight, one human had changed that with nothing more than patience. One human, one fork, one gentle truth, and now her world would never be the same again. Daniel glanced at her, his lips curving faintly. He knew this was only the beginning. She would still face fear, still struggle with the past. But now she had seen the truth with her own eyes, and no one could take that from her. The alien girl lifted her gaze, her silver eyes glowing in the light. Her lips parted in a soft breath, a whisper that carried no fear. Daniel didn't know the words, but he understood the meaning. It was trust, it was thanks, it was hope. And he answered with silence. With a quiet smile, the fork, once a blade in her eyes, had become her bridge to trust. The bond, fragile yet real, had begun to grow. And the gentle truth had won, not only tonight, but for all the days to come. For in that small moment on a space station, a human and an alien girl proved that kindness could change the galaxy.